Hello, so today's video is going to be all about rose in fragrances. I think rose can smell so different depending upon the context that you smell it in the fragrance. And I think, I could start this video off by talking about rose damascena, rose centifolia. I could talk about Turkish rose, Bulgarian rose. We could go through the whole shebang, but ultimately I don't think that's that useful because the reality is that rose sometimes nowadays is recreated through aroma chemicals that build up different facets of different roses. And really that means that the context in which the rose is placed is more perhaps important than how the rose is classified officially in the notes. So I'm just going to pick some fragrances from my collection and talk about how I would group those fragrances. Which types of rose do I consider those fragrances to be categorised as? So I'm going to start off with the light and fresh roses, then we're going to move on to the modern and bright, even sparkling roses, and then I'm going to look at the rich and gourmand roses, and then we're going to move into the dry, spicy, Middle Eastern style roses. And then finally, we're going to move into the more traditional categories of the rose patchouli, and then also the rose chypres, and even the ambers. So hopefully in this video, we're going to cover rose from lightest to darkest. So the first category is the light and fresh roses. So with this category, you're often going to smell the rose as a very pink rose, something that you might smell in a rose garden. You're just walking past the roses, there's perhaps some dew on the roses. Something where there might be some green notes combined with the rose, perhaps sometimes there's some musk or some peony, perhaps even some tart berries to make the roses sparkle slightly alongside that pink pepper. But ultimately with this category, it's the rose that is the most prominent note. The rose is the star. These fragrances are by definition more delicate fragrances, and that gives them a very spring-like quality. It also makes them feel very fresh. So this first fragrance is one that I just think is absolutely timeless, and I think this fragrance is really the best example of this type of scent. So this is Dior's Rose and Roses, and this is an eau de toilette, but this lasts just as long as some of my eau de parfum fragrances. I think this has a really good longevity considering it's an eau de toilette. So this is a very fresh pink feeling rose, typifying this category. Has a little bit of a slight greenness to it. It makes you think of perhaps the stems of the roses as well as the rose itself. But also it has a lovely musky dry down that doesn't ever cross into the powdery category. It really remains a fresh rose throughout the wear, and that's its beauty. So that one is Dior's Rose and Roses. So my second choice in this category, just because I think Dior do this category so well, is another one from Dior, but this is from the Privé line, so the slightly more expensive line. So this is La Colle Noire, and I have the slightly older version of this fragrance. I think the modern version is slightly brighter and slightly more fruity, but I still think it fits in this category well. So this one again is a pink rose, but this time it's laced with peony, which gives it a kind of slightly more powdery feel and also adds to that kind of dewy quality of the rose here. This fragrance also has a musky dry down. The musk here is slightly more powdery than the first one, but it still doesn't ever go into something that smells old-fashioned. This fragrance also does have a slight sparkle to it with some fruits, which I think is more prominent in the modern version. But yes, this one also fulfills the brief as a light and fresh feeling rose. So the next category are the modern and bright roses, and these are almost the Delina-style roses is how I categorise this style of rose. I think that's a marker that a lot of people will know and will recognise. So we're talking about roses where there's a sweetness but also a tartness combined, and often with this fragrance category you will find bright fruits, you will find citrus notes, and also this category tends to rely on particular aroma chemicals. So the one that is very famous and sort of typifies this category is when Pétalia is included in formula. So for this category, let's start off with a really bright and larger than life style rose, and this one is Angel Nova by Mugler. So here the rose is combined with raspberry and also lychee alongside akagala wood. So akagala wood gives this fragrance a slight peppery feel almost, and that really sets off the rose. It creates a great contrast, and the rose here smells fluorescent. It smells so bright and so big in this fragrance that it's just a totally different style compared with the category that we've previously talked about. This is very much not a natural style of rose. This is something that really feels quite an alien planet style of rose. But yeah, I think there are more toned down versions of this style of rose, which I will talk about next. But it is, you know, the same style that is used in fragrances such as Delina. So yeah, that's Angel Nova by Mugler. So my second choice in this category is one that was gifted, and this is Monday Rose by Banana Republic. So this fragrance always makes me think of Delina La Rosé crossed with Ormond Jane's Damask crossed with a big fluffy marshmallow. And the reason I say that is because the texture in the dry down reminds me of a marshmallow, but there's also sweetness here. And I wouldn't necessarily say it smells like a marshmallow, but definitely the texture gives me that feeling of marshmallows. So this one is really quite an airy kind of style fragrance. It's got a citrusy opening. It's quite a fresh one, this one, but still it has that slightly gourmand sweetness to it alongside a Delina-style rose that isn't fully capturing the tartness of the Delina-style rose. I think if you want something quite toned down, something definitely more sedate than Angel Nova, this is definitely more gentle. It's also clearly at a much more affordable price point. So that is Monday Rose by Banana Republic. So next we have the almost gourmand, rich feeling roses. Often in this category, roses smell purple or dark red, and they're often combined with syrupy fruits, rich vanillas, or gourmand notes. So my first choice in this category is one that's definitely on the lighter side. This is sweet, but I wouldn't say it's gourmand, although it does have a syrupy fruit note in it. So this one is Musk Noir Rose by Narciso Rodriguez, and I think this one, it's the vanilla here that really makes it feel quite sweet and quite creamy almost with the musk, but the syrupy plum just makes the rose smell purple. And that's a lovely contrast to the vanilla and the musk, which is creamy and white. The musk here is very, very clean. It smells like, you know, almost like a white musk from the 90s. It's that kind of style of musk. I think this one is just, you know, it's a great designer fragrance, isn't it? But it's a great example of a sweeter rose. So that's Musk Noir Rose. So my second choice in this category, the rose is taking more of a back seat, but it still is an integral part of this fragrance. So this is Montale's Intense Café, and this has a coffee note, which comes off to me as chocolatey, and the rose sort of sits as an enhancement of the chocolatiness. It really gives a dryness to the fragrance, and alongside the musk and the vanilla just makes this feel really rich and full. This fragrance, every time I wear it, without fail, somebody comments on it. So people just love this fragrance because it's sweet and it's gourmand feeling, and I think it's just something that people can't get enough of. It's an older fragrance. It's something that's kind of been and gone on YouTube. It's a bit forgotten now, but this was a huge hit a few years ago. And I think this one does stand the test of time. This one does merit a bit of a revisit because it is a delicious feeling fragrance. So that's Intense Café by Montale. So on the darker side of the gourmand scale and the less sweet of the gourmand scale, we have Fenty. So Fenty is more of a dark, spiced, but still slightly gourmand rose. This has blueberry, and that's really giving a lot of sweetness to this fragrance. It's quite syrupy feeling, but there's definitely that patchouli there, and it comes off as almost truffly by the dry down. It's almost like that kind of Tom Ford truffle note that's in things like Black Orchid. It does sort of come across, but it's sweeter than that. This fragrance also, it just has a lot of patchouli. It's earthy, but then on top of that is a sweet, jammy, very gourmand feeling rose. And I think this fragrance is something very unexpected. I think this fragrance is a very love it or hate it fragrance. I think if you like jammier roses, then this is going to be a fragrance that you might enjoy. But I'm not putting my money on it because the patchouli and that kind of truffly aspect to this and the spiciness, it's very mild spiciness, but there's definitely a spiciness there, makes this one hard for a lot of people. And I think that's why this fragrance is kind of under the radar in a way, even though it's a celebrity fragrance, even though it's something that I think a lot of people dismiss. I think this one really does stand out as very different to what else is on the market right now. So that's Fenty by Fenty. So I'm going to split the gourmand category, and I'm going to have a second category of gourmand, as the boozier roses. And I'm doing this because I'm one of those people who sense kind of almost a fermented feel in some rose fragrances. And there's a great reason behind that, because actually yeast produce a chemical called phenyl ethyl acetate, and that is also present in rose. And that's where the crossover comes from. If you've been watching Tammy Roxanne, Tammy clearly also smells this boozy crossover, and she says that her husband particularly detects it and will often smell her rose fragrances and say that she smells of beer. And this is totally a thing that some people smell. So my first one is Si by Giorgio Armani, and I say this is an older formulation, so if you want that kind of boozy, beery kind of smell, I would go with the intense version that's currently on the market. But this one is just syrupy blackcurrant alongside that beery smelling rose, and then a lot of vanilla in the dry down. And there's also a slight soapiness to this fragrance, which I think is very much more enhanced in the current version of the Eau de Parfum, and that's the freesia. But yeah, this one I just love for the beeriness. I love the sort of fermented feel of the rose here. It sounds really odd, and if you can't actually smell that, then you must be thinking I'm mad. But actually, the syrupiness of the rose alongside that beery smell is just delicious to me. My mum, when I was growing up, worked in a brewery, and every Tuesday they would brew beer. And I love the smell of beer. It's just something I've grown up with. So this one just ticks all the boxes for me. Syrupy blackcurrant, also a massive tick for me. So that's Si by Giorgio Armani. So my other boozy selection is something that's boozy in a very different way. So this is boozy in a kind of wooden barrel, sherry kind of smell. So this one is a Rose For by Floris. So this is really a tea fragrance. It's a woody tea, resinous feeling fragrance, very rich, but the rose here is very secondary, and it just sort of enhances the whole thing and makes it smell almost velvety in texture. I think this one is one to try if you like Velvety by Penhaligon's, if you like fragrances like Portrait of a Lady by Frederic Malle, but you find them a little bit too much. This one's just a little bit dialed back compared to those two. Not exactly the same at all, but clearly in the same style. That kind of velvety feeling, textured rose, alongside some woodiness, and then also that slightly kind of boozy feeling as well. So that's Floris A Rose For. So the next category are the Middle Eastern style roses. So with these fragrances, we're looking at dry feeling roses, red feeling roses, dry spices, warm patchoulis, rich ouds, those kinds of notes that are going to be with the rose. And I think there's definitely a whole spectrum of fragrances that you could include here. And I feel like some of the lighter ones are still quite on the cusp of this category and other categories. And then some of the darker ones are slightly more challenging. And clearly there are much more challenging Middle Eastern style roses than I have in my own collection. But this is just what I have. So I would say the lightest one that I have is this one by Funmi Monet. So this one gets compared to Roses Vanille. So that gives you an idea of just how light and airy this is. But I would say compared to Roses Vanille, this has a lot more amber. It's a lot more base heavy than something like Roses Vanille. And this one just has a very red feeling rose, but it's not overly sweet. It's definitely got some citrus at the top, and it's just got a kind of warmth to it, a sort of gentle spice to it, but not anything too overt. This definitely could sit in the kind of beery rose category as well. It definitely does have a little bit of a feeling of that, but not as much as those other two have that kind of booziness to them. This is definitely something that is more in the Middle Eastern style, and I think it's on the lighter side. So that's Funmi Monet's Exalté. The next one is a fragrance that is incredibly affordable and gets a hugely mixed reaction. Some people absolutely love this and think it's a bargain. They think it's, punching above its weight. Other people just recoil. And I know that when I first tried this one, I had the recoil reflex. And actually the second time I tried it, I was totally in love. And this is really the fragrance in my life that I've done the biggest 180 on. I've completely changed my mind on this one from the first try to the second try. It stunned me. So this one is Chopard Love. So this is a load of different roses that really come off as quite a dry, spiced rose. Very much in a Middle Eastern style, even though it's not a Middle Eastern fragrance brand. And this as well has a lot of patchouli, and it's a real dry feeling patchouli. I think this fragrance definitely has, you know, a little bit of sweetness to it. It's not totally unapproachable. It definitely does have a slight sweetness there, but it's really the dryness that I initially found challenging. But I think the more you wear this, you realise just how good the rose is in this fragrance, how it just has different facets to it, and you notice different things throughout the wear. It's just such a stunning fragrance. Just a beautiful fragrance from Chopard. And the bottle is stunning too, because the lid is also totally glass, which is something you don't see very often with perfume bottles. It just feels luxurious through and through, even though it's not at a luxurious price point. So that's Chopard's Love. So the final category are the more classic feeling Chypres fragrances, the rose amber fragrances, even the rose patchouli fragrances. Things that are in a more classical style, often with oak moss. Often they have a slight sparkle to these roses. They often feel quite red, sometimes they're with geranium. They've usually got a little bit of an earthy feel to the undertone of the fragrance. So this one is Gris Dior by Dior. It's a classic for a reason. This one is the archetypal spring rainy day fragrance, as Lizzie from Rose & Jones describes it. Totally agree with her. Definitely a spring rainy day fragrance for me too. So this is quite sparkly to begin with, some citrus, has some greenness, but it's really the oak moss and the musk that comes to dominate the dry down along with the rose. It's really long lasting. It's not overly strong, but it just is something that feels very elegant and put together and very work appropriate. So that's Gris Dior. Another one that I feel is very work appropriate, but people argue with me over this one because people say this one is very strong. And I agree, but you don't have to spray too much of this one. So this one is Coco Mademoiselle by Chanel. I think we all know how this smells really, don't we? It's a citrus patchouli fragrance, but with a rose edge to it. And again, you know, it's just a very classical smelling fragrance. I'm not going to linger on this one because I think most people, if not everybody, has probably smelt this one by now. So finally, for the darker end of the spectrum, we have the deep, resinous rose patchouli fragrance that is Chanel's Coco. So this fragrance, I think it's, you know, it's not a Chypres. It's more of a deep, resinous, spicy rose patchouli. The rose here is very red feeling. It's a very powdery rose. But yeah, it's the rose that's sort of joined by all the other notes. Really, it's the spices here that dominate. And there's a kind of almost animalic purr to this as well underneath all of the fragrance. It's very subtle, but it still is there even in the modern version. I think if you smelt this in your childhood, this is something you never forget. I'm pretty sure that I had relatives that wore this one because it just transports me instantly back to my childhood. And I love wearing this in the winter. It just feels like a little bit of stability in this mad world of constant releases and trends in fragrance. You can always go back and smell Chanel's Coco. And so that's Chanel's Coco. So clearly some of these categories do overlap. I could definitely switch some of these fragrances between different categories, and also there are several fragrances in my collection that I haven't covered. Clearly I've not covered powdery roses. I think if I was going to choose one from my collection, or perhaps two from my collection for that, I would choose Ombre Nuit and perhaps also Chanel's Coco Noir, but perhaps that's for another video. I also think, you know, I could probably add a few more jammy roses to my collection. I really feel like I'm lacking in jammy roses, and I feel like that's another category that I could have covered in this video. But please do let me know what you think is your favourite category of roses that I've kind of featured here, or perhaps I've not featured here. Perhaps there's another style of rose that you really feel like I've missed out on that I should know about. Please let me know your favourite rose fragrance, and also if you've got another fragrance in these categories that you think is a better example, please do let me know about it. So thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, then please do press the like button, and also please consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.